The blood-soaked leather satchel lay abandoned in the dust, beside Eleanor Langley's motionless body as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Wyoming plains. Her golden hair now stained crimson from the wound at her temple, her chest barely rising and falling with each shallow breath that kept her tethered to this world by the thinnest of threads. It was 1878, and Medicine Bow, Wyoming had seen its share of troubles since the railroad had brought prosperity and predators alike to the once quiet frontier settlement. Eleanor had been the last one to leave the Medicine Bow Bank that fateful Friday afternoon, finishing the ledgers as she always did with meticulous care. At 24, she had built a respectable life for herself after arriving from Boston 3 years prior, fleeing the suffocating expectations of a family that saw her only as marriage material to cement business alliances. In Medicine Bow, she had found independence as the bank manager's assistant, earning respect through competence rather than connections. She hadn't heard them enter. 3 men with bandanas pulled up over their faces, guns drawn. The youngest one, nervous and twitchy, had been the problem. When Eleanor had moved too suddenly to comply with their demands, his finger had squeezed the trigger. The bullet had grazed her temple, sending her crashing into the corner of the heavy oak desk before she collapsed to the floor. "You fool," the leader had hissed. "Now we've got a murder on our hands." "She ain't dead yet," another voice had replied, kneeling beside her, fingers at her throat. "But she will be soon enough. Ain't nobody survive a head wound like that. Grab the money, all of it, and her purse too, make it look like a robbery gone wrong." Eleanor had lain there, consciousness fading in and out as they emptied the safe. The last thing she remembered was being dragged outside to their horses, then thrown over a saddle like a sack of grain. They had ridden for what seemed like hours before stopping. "Just leave her here. Animals will take care of the rest." Then darkness. Weston Xavier pulled his hat lower to shield his eyes from the relentless Wyoming sun. At 32, he'd spent more years in the saddle than out of it, and the life of a cowboy had etched its mark on his weathered face and calloused hands. He'd been riding fence line for the Diamond Cross Ranch since dawn, checking for breaks and mending what needed fixing. His horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Buck, knew the routine as well as he did. A flash of color caught his eye, something unnatural against the tawny landscape of sage and grass. He reined Buck toward it, curiosity more than caution guiding him. As he drew closer, the shape resolved itself into something that made his blood run cold. A woman, discarded like trash in the middle of nowhere, her dress torn and bloodied. "Whoa, boy," Weston murmured, dismounting swiftly and approaching with caution. He'd seen death before, too much of it during the war and after, but something about the abandoned vulnerability of this woman made his chest tighten with anger. He knelt beside her, noting the fine quality of her dress despite the blood and dust. She wasn't a working girl or a farm wife. Her hands were too smooth, her clothing too fine. When he gently turned her over, he sucked in a sharp breath. Despite the blood matting her golden hair and the ugly wound at her temple, she was beautiful and, to his shock, still warm. Weston pressed his fingers to her throat, hardly daring to hope. Their faint but unmistakable a pulse fluttered beneath his fingertips. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked urgently, but she gave no response. Without hesitation, he gathered her into his arms, surprised at how light she felt despite the substantial fabric of her dress. She needed a doctor, and fast. The Diamond Cross was closer than town, and Doc Palmer was staying there, treating the foreman's boy for a broken arm. "Hold on, miss," he murmured, mounting Buck with practiced ease while cradling her against his chest. "Just hold on." He rode hard, one arm securing the unconscious woman against him, the other guiding Buck across the familiar terrain. The woman moaned once when they jumped a small gully, her head lolling against his shoulder. "Almost there," Weston promised, though he doubted she could hear him. "Just stay with me." The Diamond Cross Ranch house appeared on the horizon after what felt like an eternity. Weston didn't slow until they reached the yard, where he shouted for help before he'd even fully stopped. "Doc Palmer, Mrs. Henderson," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. The ranch owner's wife emerged first, her lined face registering shock at the sight before her. "Merciful heavens, Weston. What's happened?" "Found her out by the north fence line," he explained quickly, dismounting carefully with his precious burden. "She's alive, but barely. Is the doc still here, in the bunkhouse with Tommy? I'll fetch him. Bring her inside, quick now." Weston carried Eleanor into the ranch house, following Mrs. Henderson's directions to lay her on the bed in the spare room. He stepped back as the housekeeper bustled in with clean towels and a basin of water, feeling suddenly useless as the women began removing the injured woman's soiled outer garments. "Wait outside, Weston," Mrs. Henderson instructed firmly. "This ain't proper for a man to see." He retreated to the hallway, hat in hand, the woman's pale face burned into his memory. Doc Palmer arrived moments later, medical bag in hand, and disappeared into the room without a word to Weston. The minutes crawled by as Weston paced the hallway, inexplicably invested in the fate of a woman he'd never met. Nearly an hour passed before Doc Palmer emerged, wiping his hands on a cloth. "She's alive," he said, answering Weston's unspoken question. "But it was a close thing. Bullet grazed her skull, and she took another blow to the head after that, lost a fair amount of blood." "Will she recover?" The doctor's face grew grave. "Hard to say with head injuries. She's young and seems strong, but she hasn't woken yet. That's concerning. The next day or two will tell. If she wakes, her chances improve considerably. If she doesn't, then prepare for the worst. Mrs. Henderson is sitting with her now. I've done all I can." Weston nodded, surprised by the depth of his disappointment. "Any idea who she is?" Mrs. Henderson found this in her dress pocket. The doctor handed over a small silver locket. "It's engraved with the initials E.L., nothing else to identify her." Weston turned the locket over in his calloused hands, feeling like an intruder on the woman's privacy. "I'll take it to Sheriff Miller in town. Maybe someone's reported a missing woman." "Good idea. I'll stay here tonight to monitor her condition." Weston hesitated. "I found her near the north fence line. Looked like she'd been dragged there and left to die. This wasn't an accident, Doc. I suspected as much." "The sheriff will want to know." Weston nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll ride to town now. Be back by nightfall." The ride to Medicine Bow gave Weston too much time to think about the golden-haired woman fighting for her life. Something about her vulnerability and the callousness of whoever had hurt her stirred protective instincts he hadn't known he possessed. He found himself pushing Buck to a faster pace than necessary, as if delivering the news to the sheriff might somehow help her heal more quickly. Medicine Bow was bustling with the usual Friday activities as Weston rode in. He tied Buck outside the sheriff's office and strode inside, the locket secured in his shirt pocket. Sheriff Miller looked up from his desk, surprise registering at the sight of Weston. They weren't exactly friends, but the lawman respected the quiet cowboy who rarely caused trouble. "Xavier, what brings you to town?" Weston related his discovery without embellishment, placing the locket on the sheriff's desk when he finished. "E.L.," the sheriff mused, examining the piece. "Might be Eleanor Langley, works at the bank. Pretty blonde lady about your age. Hasn't been in town long, few years maybe. Came from back east somewhere." "The bank, you say?" "Yeah." The sheriff's expression darkened. "Which reminds me, bank was robbed this afternoon. 3 men masked. They cleaned out the safe and disappeared. Nobody mentioned a missing woman, though. Maybe nobody's noticed yet. I'll head out there right away, see if she matches the description. You say she's at the Diamond Cross? Yes, sir. Doc Palmer's with her. The sheriff stood, buckling on his gun belt. I appreciate you bringing this to me prompt-like, Xavier. I'll stop by the ranch tomorrow. I'll be there, Weston replied, surprising himself with the firmness of his commitment. He left the sheriff's office and headed to the general store, suddenly aware of the woman's needs when if she woke. He purchased a hairbrush, a small bottle of rose water, and some plain but serviceable undergarments that made his ears burn when he asked the shopkeeper's wife to help him select them. She gave him a knowing look, but asked no questions as she wrapped the items. For a lady friend who's fallen on hard times, was all he offered by way of explanation. By the time Weston returned to the Diamond Cross, twilight was settling over the land. He handed his packages to Mrs. Henderson, who nodded approvingly. Thoughtful of you, Weston. She's still sleeping, but the doc says her breathing's stronger now. Sheriff thinks she might be Eleanor Langley, works at the bank in town. Bank was robbed today. Poor child, Mrs. Henderson clucked sympathetically. What kind of monsters would do such a thing? The kind that need catching, Weston replied grimly. Sheriff's coming by tomorrow, is it? Would it be all right if I sat with her a while? Mrs. Henderson studied him with knowing eyes. I suppose that would be all right so long as I'm in and out checking on her. Door stays open, mind you. Weston nodded, removing his hat as he entered the dimly lit room. Eleanor lay still beneath the covers, her face ghostly pale against the pillows. Someone had washed the blood from her hair, revealing its true golden hue. A bandage circled her head, stark white against her skin. He settled into the chair beside the bed, feeling awkward and intrusive yet unable to leave. Miss Langley, he said softly, testing the name. I hope that's really who you are, or I'm talking to a stranger. She made no response, her breathing deep and even. I'm Weston Xavier. Found you today out on the range. Don't know if you can hear me, but the doc says you need to wake up soon. He hesitated, then continued. I brought you some things from town. Nothing fancy, but Mrs. Henderson said they'd do until you're well enough to choose for yourself. The one-sided conversation faltered, and Weston fell silent, simply watching over her as the night deepened around the ranch. Eventually, Mrs. Henderson returned with a tray of food for him. You should get some rest, she advised. I'll sit with her through the night. But Weston found himself reluctant to leave. I'll take first watch if you don't mind. You've been working all day. The older woman smiled knowingly but didn't argue. Suit yourself. Call if there's any change. Alone again with Eleanor, Weston settled in for a long night. He spoke to her occasionally, telling her about the ranch, about Buck, about the peaceful life he'd built after years of wandering. Somewhere in the deepest hours of the night, he dozed off in the chair, hat tipped over his eyes. A small sound woke him, a whimper so faint he might have dreamed it. Weston straightened, instantly alert. Eleanor's face was contorted in what appeared to be pain, her head moving restlessly on the pillow. Miss Langley, he whispered, leaning forward, her eyelids fluttered, and then, miracle of miracles, they opened. Disoriented blue eyes stared up at the ceiling before finding his face. Water, she rasped, the word barely audible. Weston's heart leaped. He reached for the glass on the bedside table, gently lifting her head to help her drink. She managed only a sip before sinking back, exhausted by even that small effort. I'll get the doc, Weston said, but her hand weakly caught his wrist. Who? She managed. I'm Weston Xavier, madam. Found you out on the range. You're safe now at the Diamond Cross Ranch. Her eyes clouded with confusion. The bank, men with guns. It's all right. Sheriff's been notified. Don't try to talk now. Her eyelids drooped, but she fought to keep them open. Thank you, she whispered before sleep claimed her again. Weston sat frozen for a moment, relief washing over him in an unexpected wave. Then he hurried to wake Doc Palmer with the news. The doctor examined Eleanor thoroughly, his expression more hopeful than it had been earlier. "This is good," he pronounced. "Very good." Her waking and recognizing what happened shows her mind's working. She's not out of danger yet, but her chances just improved considerably. "What happens now?" Weston asked. "Now we wait. She'll likely drift in and out for a while. Head injuries take time to heal. She needs rest, nourishment, and care." Weston nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. "I'll speak to Mr. Henderson about keeping her here until she's recovered." The ranch owner had no objections when approached at breakfast. "Any victim of outlaws is welcome at my table," he declared. "Besides, the missus seems taken with your young lady." "She's not my young lady," Weston corrected quickly, ignoring the knowing looks exchanged around the table. Sheriff Miller arrived mid-morning, confirming that the injured woman was indeed Eleanor Langley. "Bank manager says she was closing up when the robbery happened. Must have surprised the thieves or tried to stop them. They left no witnesses or thought they hadn't." "You think they'll come back for her when they realize she's alive?" Weston asked, tension coiling in his gut. "Maybe." "3 of them, according to witnesses. Headed north after the robbery. I've telegraphed the surrounding counties, but—" The sheriff shrugged, the gesture conveying the slim chances of catching the men. "I'll keep an eye on her," Weston promised. The sheriff nodded. "I'd appreciate if you'd bring her to town when she's well enough to give a statement. Might help us identify these fellas." "Of course." Over the next several days, Eleanor drifted between consciousness and sleep. Each time she woke, she seemed more lucid, able to take broth and speak briefly before exhaustion claimed her again. Weston found himself arranging his work schedule around her waking periods, an adjustment the foreman noted with raised eyebrows but no comment. On the 4th day, Weston entered her room to find Eleanor sitting up against the pillows, her golden hair neatly braided by Mrs. Henderson. The improvement in her appearance was striking. Color had returned to her cheeks, and though the bandage remained, her eyes were clear and alert. "Mr. Xavier," she greeted him, her voice stronger than he'd yet heard it. "Mrs. Henderson says I owe you my life." Weston shifted uncomfortably, hat in hand. "Anyone would have done the same, perhaps, but it wasn't anyone, it was you." Her direct gaze made him feel strangely exposed. "Thank you," he nodded, searching for something appropriate to say. "How are you feeling today, Miss Langley?" "Better. The headaches come and go, but Dr. Palmer says that's to be expected." She hesitated. "I've been imposing on your friend's hospitality for too long. As soon as I'm able, I should return to town." "There's no rush," Weston assured her. "Mr. Henderson says you're welcome as long as needed. Besides, the doctor doesn't think you should be moved yet." Relief crossed her features. "That's very kind. I confess I'm not sure what awaits me in town. My rooms are above the millinery shop, but I don't know if my position at the bank." She trailed off, uncertainty clouding her face. "The sheriff says your employer's concerned for you. And as for the men who did this, they're still at large, but there's a posse tracking them." Eleanor's fingers twisted in the bedsheet. "I remember their voices, not their faces. They wore bandanas, but I would know those voices again." She shivered. "They thought I was dead. They meant to leave me for the coyotes." Weston's jaw tightened at the matter-of-fact way she stated this. "Well, they were wrong about that. You're stronger than they reckoned." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "So it seems." She studied him thoughtfully. "Mrs. Henderson says you've barely left the ranch since bringing me here. Don't you have duties elsewhere?" "Nothing that can't wait," he replied, surprising himself with the truth of it. The foreman had been understanding, assigning him tasks close to the ranch house. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Xavier. I know so little about the man who saved my life." Weston rarely spoke about himself, but found himself responding to her genuine interest. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about fighting for the Union in the war when he was barely 18, about drifting west afterward, unable to settle until he found a home at the Diamond Cross 5 years ago. "And family?" she asked. "Lost my pa in the war. Ma remarried and moved to California with my younger sister. We write, but I haven't seen them in years," he shrugged. "Ranch hands don't make for stable family men." "Yet you seem quite stable to me," Eleanor observed. "Dependable, the kind of man others rely on in a crisis." Weston felt heat rise to his face at her assessment. "What about you? The sheriff mentioned you came from back east." Eleanor's expression closed slightly. "Boston. My family is in banking and shipping. They had expectations for me that didn't align with my own desires." "Such as?" "Marriage to a business associate 30 years my senior, for one." Her tone was light, but Weston detected old pain beneath it. "I preferred to make my own way, even if it meant leaving everything familiar behind. Brave choice. Necessary one." She smiled ruefully. "Though I'm beginning to wonder if I've simply exchanged one set of constraints for another. Medicine Bow offers fewer options for a single woman than I'd hoped. Yet you've made a place for yourself at the bank." "Yes, though advancement possibilities are limited. Mr. Hargrove is kind but traditional in his views." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Henderson bringing in a tray with Eleanor's lunch. Weston took his leave, but found himself returning later that evening, drawn by some pull he couldn't quite name. As Eleanor's strength returned over the following days, their conversations deepened. Weston brought her books from the ranch library, and they discovered a shared love of adventure tales and history. He found her intellect sharp and her observations insightful, qualities he hadn't often encountered in the women of his acquaintance. For her part, Eleanor seemed to genuinely enjoy his company, her face lighting up when he entered her room. She began taking short walks with him around the ranch house, leaning on his arm when her strength faltered. Each day, she ventured a little further, her determination to recover fully evident in every step. 2 weeks after her arrival at Diamond Cross, Dr. Palmer declared Eleanor well enough to return to town, though he cautioned against resuming her full duties at the bank immediately. "The dizziness should continue to decrease," he advised, "but head injuries can be tricky. Any return of severe headaches or confusion, and I want to see you straight away." Eleanor nodded, though Weston noticed a shadow cross her face at the prospect of leaving. He felt an answering reluctance himself, one that prompted him to speak up. "I'll escort Miss Langley to town tomorrow if that's agreeable," he offered. "Make sure she's settled properly." "That would be most kind, Mr. Xavier," Eleanor replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. That evening after dinner, Weston found Eleanor on the front porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cooling air. She was gazing at the stars, her profile limned in silver by the rising moon. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, joining her at the railing. She glanced at him, then back at the sky. "I was thinking about how quickly life can change. 3 weeks ago, I was keeping ledgers and planning a small vegetable garden behind my rooms. Then, in one moment, everything shifted. For the worse, that's the strange part." She turned to face him fully. "Being shot and left for dead should qualify as the worst experience of my life. Yet somehow in the aftermath I've found—" She hesitated. "Connection, purpose perhaps, I'm not explaining it well." "I think I understand," Weston said quietly. "Sometimes it takes a shock to make us see what's been missing." "Yes, exactly." Her eyes held his. I've been more myself these past 2 weeks than in the 3 years since coming west. How odd that it took nearly dying to make me feel truly alive." Weston stepped closer, drawn by something in her expression. "And what will you do with this new aliveness, Miss Langley?" "Eleanor," she corrected softly. "After all we've shared, I think we're past formalities, don't you?" "Eleanor," he repeated, liking the way it felt on his tongue. "And I'm Weston." "Weston," she echoed, then continued, "As for what I'll do, I'm not certain. Return to my position, I suppose, though it feels like wearing someone else's clothes now." "You could stay," he suggested, the words escaping before he could consider them fully. "The Hendersons have grown fond of you. There might be work here at the ranch." Hope flickered briefly in her eyes before she shook her head. "I couldn't impose further, and what position could I possibly fill? I don't imagine the Diamond Cross has much need for a bookkeeper." "Every successful ranch needs proper accounts," Weston argued. "Mr. Henderson complains about the books every tax season." She laughed softly. "A tempting proposition, but I doubt Mrs. Henderson would approve of a single woman living permanently at her ranch full of cowboys." "Unless she wasn't single," Weston said, then immediately wished he could recall the words at seeing Eleanor's startled expression. "I didn't mean that is, Weston," she interrupted gently. "Are you proposing marriage to solve a housing dilemma?" He ran a hand through his hair, mortified. "No. I mean, not like that. I'm making a mess of this." "Perhaps you should try again," she suggested, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Weston took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Eleanor, I know we've only known each other a short while, but these weeks have been the most meaningful of my life. There's something between us, something I've never felt before. I don't want it to end when you return to town." Her expression softened. "I feel it too. But marriage, Weston, that's quite a leap from escorting an injured woman back to health." "I'm not proposing. Not exactly." He took her hands in his. "But I am asking for a chance to court you properly, to see if what we've started here might grow into something lasting." Eleanor's fingers tightened around his. "I would like that very much." The next morning, Weston drove Eleanor to town in the ranch wagon, her few belongings packed in a carpetbag Mrs. Henderson had provided. The ride was pleasant, the early summer day warm but not yet hot, wildflowers dotting the prairie in bursts of color. "It's beautiful," Eleanor remarked, taking in the vast landscape. "I've been in Medicine Bow for 3 years, but I rarely venture beyond the town limits." "The open country gets in your blood," Weston replied. "Makes town walls feel too confining after a while." Medicine Bow appeared on the horizon, the railroad station its most prominent feature. As they drew closer, Eleanor grew quiet, tension evident in the set of her shoulders. "Having second thoughts?" Weston asked gently. "No, just apprehensive. Returning feels strange after everything that's happened." He understood. The town represented the life she'd lived before, a life that had nearly ended in violence. And while she was returning physically healed, something fundamental had shifted within her. They stopped first at the sheriff's office, where Eleanor provided a detailed statement about the robbery. Though she couldn't identify the men's faces, her description of their voices, builds, and mannerisms added valuable details to the investigation. "One of them called another Jed," she recalled. "The leader, tall man with a deep voice, he was angry about it, like it was a mistake to use his real name." Sheriff Miller nodded, making notes. "That helps, Miss Langley. We've had reports of a Jedediah Tanner running with a gang north of here. This might connect him to our robbery." Next, they visited the bank, where Mr. Hargrove greeted Eleanor with genuine relief. "Miss Langley, we feared the worst when you disappeared. The sheriff told us you'd been found, but to see you looking so well, it's a blessing." "Thank you, Mr. Hargrove. I've been fortunate in my rescuer and caregivers." She gestured to Weston, who hung back respectfully. Your position remains open, of course, the bank manager assured her, though I understand if you need more time to recover fully. I appreciate that. I would like to ease back into my duties, perhaps half days to start. Absolutely. We can discuss the details when you're ready to begin. Finally, they arrived at the small rooms Eleanor rented above the millinery shop. The landlady, Mrs. Peterson, fussed over her and insisted on bringing up hot water and fresh linens. All your things are just as you left them, she assured Eleanor. I've been keeping an eye on your place, dusting and such. Oh, and that little garden you started out back, I've watered it for you. That's very kind, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you. When they were finally alone in her sitting room, Eleanor surveyed her surroundings with a strange detachment. It feels smaller than I remembered, and emptier. Weston understood. The neat, spare rooms reflected the contained life she'd built, practical, respectable, but lacking the warmth of true connection. I should let you rest, he said, though reluctant to leave her. Eleanor turned to him, her expression vulnerable. When will I see you again? Tomorrow. I could come for lunch if you'd permit it. I would like that very much. Weston hesitated, then stepped forward and gently took her hand, raising it to his lips. Until tomorrow, then. Her cheeks flushed prettily. Until tomorrow. True to his word, Weston returned the next day and the next, establishing a pattern that soon had the town talking. He escorted Eleanor to church on Sunday, dined with her regularly at the hotel restaurant, and walked with her in the evenings when the summer heat had eased. Eleanor gradually resumed her duties at the bank, though she confided to Weston that the work no longer satisfied her as it once had. I keep thinking about what you said about the ranch needing proper accounts, she told him one evening as they sat on the bench outside her rooms. Mr. Henderson mentioned it again when I visited last week. You visited the ranch? Weston asked, pleased. Mrs. Henderson invited me for tea. She's teaching me to make her famous apple pie. Eleanor smiled sheepishly. I'm afraid I'm not a natural in the kitchen. And what does Mr. Henderson think of your bookkeeping abilities? He was quite interested when I mentioned my experience. Said he's been meaning to hire someone to organize the ranch accounts properly, especially with the new cattle contracts. Weston fought to keep his expression neutral, though hope surged within him. Did he offer you the position? Not officially, but he suggested I might consider taking it on, part-time to start. She glanced at him. Would that be agreeable to you? More than agreeable, he assured her, taking her hand. It would mean seeing you more often. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Their courtship progressed steadily through the summer months. Weston found in Eleanor a partner who challenged and complimented him, whose quiet strength matched his own. For her part, Eleanor blossomed under Weston's steady affection, growing more confident and vibrant with each passing week. By mid-August, Eleanor was spending 3 days a week at the Diamond Cross, organizing the ranch's financial records and implementing a proper accounting system. The arrangement allowed her to maintain her independence while deepening her connection to Weston and the life of the ranch. But the peace they had found was shattered on a warm September afternoon when Sheriff Miller rode hard into the Diamond Cross yard, calling for Weston. Tanner's gang has been spotted 15 miles north of here, he announced without preamble. 3 men matching the description of our bank robbers. I'm gathering a posse to ride out and apprehend them. Weston's jaw tightened. You think they're the ones who hurt Eleanor? Seems likely. They've hit 2 more banks since Medicine Bow, same method. Left a teller for dead in the last one, but he survived to identify Tanner. I'll ride with you. The sheriff nodded, unsurprised. Figured you would. We leave at first light. When Weston broke the news to Eleanor, her face paled, but her voice remained steady. You have to go. If these are the same men, They need to be brought to justice before they hurt anyone else. I don't like leaving you unprotected. I'll be perfectly safe at the ranch. Mrs. Henderson has already invited me to stay in the house while you're gone." She placed a hand against his cheek. "Just promise me you'll be careful. I couldn't bear to lose you now." "You won't lose me," he vowed, covering her hand with his own. "I have too much to come back for." The posse departed at dawn, 12 men, including Weston and the sheriff. The trail led them north into the more rugged country toward the Montana border, where the landscape offered numerous hiding places for outlaws. On the third day, they found the remains of a camp still warm. "They're close," the sheriff declared. "Probably spotted us and are trying to make the territorial line." They rode hard, gaining ground until finally, as the sun was setting, they spotted 3 riders in the distance. "That's them," Sheriff Miller shouted. "Spread out." What followed was a chaotic pursuit through increasingly rough terrain. As darkness fell, the outlaws separated, forcing the posse to divide as well. Weston found himself partnered with the sheriff, tracking the man they believed to be Jedediah Tanner himself. They cornered him at last in a narrow canyon, where their quarry decided to make a stand rather than surrender. Gunfire erupted in the darkness, bullets ricocheting off stone. Weston felt one pass close enough to hear its whistle, but kept his position, returning fire methodically. A cry told him one of their shots had found its mark. Then silence. "Tanner," the sheriff called, "it's over. Throw out your weapon." "Go to hell," came the reply, followed by another shot that struck perilously close to where Weston crouched. "Last chance," the sheriff warned. The outlaw's answer was a final, desperate volley that emptied his gun. In the momentary quiet that followed, Weston and the sheriff rushed his position, finding Tanner slumped against a boulder, blood darkening his shirt from a wound in his shoulder. "Jedediah Tanner," Sheriff Miller said, keeping his gun trained on the man, "you're under arrest for robbery and attempted murder." The outlaw glared up at them, defiance in his eyes despite his injury. "Don't know what you're talking about." "Medicine Bow Bank 3 months ago," Weston said coldly. "You left a woman for dead." Something flickered in Tanner's eyes, recognition, perhaps even a hint of remorse, but it was quickly replaced by hard calculation. "Prove it." "She survived," Weston told him, satisfaction coursing through him at the shock that registered on the outlaw's face. "She'll identify you in court." The journey back to Medicine Bow was arduous. The posse had captured all 3 outlaws, though one had been killed resisting arrest. Tanner and his remaining partner were bound and guarded carefully, their wounds treated enough to keep them alive for trial. Word reached the Diamond Cross before they arrived. Eleanor was waiting on the porch when the dusty, exhausted men rode in, her eyes searching anxiously until she found Weston. He dismounted wearily, removing his hat as he approached her. "You're hurt," she said immediately, noting the bandage on his arm where a bullet had grazed him. "It's nothing," he assured her, then nodded toward the prisoners. "We got them. Tanner and his man Jenkins. The third one didn't make it." Eleanor's gaze shifted to the bound outlaws, her expression hardening as she recognized them despite their now uncovered faces. "That's them. The voices, I'd know them anywhere." Sheriff Miller approached, respectfully removing his hat. "Miss Langley, I'll need you to make a formal identification at the trial." "I'll be there," she promised, her voice unwavering. That night, after Weston had bathed and rested, he found Eleanor in the garden behind the ranch house. Moonlight silvered her hair as she turned to him, her smile warming him more than any fire could. "I was worried," she admitted as he joined her. "Every hour you were gone felt like an eternity." "I'm back now," he said simply, "and those men won't hurt anyone else. Because of you. Because of us," he corrected. If you hadn't survived to identify them, they might have continued their spree indefinitely. She considered this, then nodded slowly. I suppose we saved each other in different ways. The truth of her words struck Weston deeply. She had saved him from a life of solitude, from the emptiness he hadn't even recognized until she filled it. And now, watching her in the moonlight, he knew with absolute certainty what he wanted. "Eleanor," he began, taking her hands in his. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and purpose to days that once just blended together." Her eyes widened as he lowered himself to one knee before her. "I know we come from different worlds, and I can't offer you the luxuries you left behind in Boston. But I can promise to love you, protect you, and build a life with you filled with honesty and respect." He drew a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple silver ring set with a small pearl. "Eleanor Langley, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears glistened in her eyes as she looked down at him. "Oh, Weston. Nothing in Boston could compare to what you're offering me, a love born of choice rather than convenience, a partnership of equals." Her voice broke slightly. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." With trembling fingers, he slipped the ring onto her hand, then rose to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the promise of all that was to come. The trial of Jedediah Tanner and Thomas Jenkins took place in October. Eleanor testified clearly and convincingly, her identification of the men's voices corroborated by physical evidence and the testimony of other victims. When the judge sentenced them to 20 years in the territorial prison, justice felt complete. Eleanor and Weston were married on a crisp November day in the small church in Medicine Bow. Mrs. Henderson had insisted on hosting the reception at the Diamond Cross, where the couple would make their home in a small but comfortable cabin near the main house. "You look beautiful," Weston whispered as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. Eleanor smiled up at him, radiant in a gown of cream-colored silk. "And you are the most handsome cowboy in Wyoming territory." "The luckiest, certainly," he replied, drawing her closer. Their life together unfolded with the changing seasons. Eleanor continued managing the ranch accounts, gradually taking on more responsibilities as her skills and confidence grew. Weston was promoted to foreman when the old one retired, a position that allowed him to balance his duties with time for his wife and, eventually, their growing family. Their first child, a son they named William, arrived the following autumn, bringing joy and a healthy dose of chaos to their orderly life. Eleanor took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything, though she confessed to Weston during late-night feedings that she felt thoroughly unprepared. "I never imagined myself as someone's mother," she admitted, cradling their son against her shoulder. In Boston, children were accessories to be seen at appropriate times and raised by nannies. This being responsible for every aspect of this little person's life, it's terrifying. "And wonderful," Weston added, watching them with undisguised adoration. "Yes," she agreed softly. "Wonderful in a way I never knew existed." As the years passed, the Diamond Cross prospered under the combined efforts of its dedicated staff. Eleanor's financial acumen helped the ranch weather market fluctuations that bankrupted less cautious operations, while Weston's practical knowledge of cattle and land management ensured their herds remained healthy and productive. Their family grew with the addition of a daughter, Sarah, 3 years after William's birth. The children thrived in the ranch environment, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk, developing a deep connection to the land that sustained them. Eleanor never entirely forgot the violence that had brought her and Weston together, but the memory lost its power to frighten her as time passed. Occasionally, She would touch the faint scar at her temple and reflect on how close she had come to losing everything before she'd truly found it. On the 5th anniversary of the day Weston had found her, they rode together to the spot where their story had begun. The landscape looked different in spring, carpeted with wildflowers and vibrant with new growth, but Weston located the exact place with unerring accuracy. "Here," he said, dismounting and helping Eleanor from her horse. "This is where you were when I found you." Eleanor stood silent for a moment, taking it in. It seems impossible that such a terrible moment could lead to such happiness. "Life takes strange turns," Weston agreed, drawing her into his arms. "I've thanked God every day that I was riding fence that afternoon. As have I." She leaned into his embrace. "You know what I was thinking in those brief moments when I was conscious after they left me? I was thinking that I didn't want to die without having truly lived, without having loved and been loved in return." "And have you truly lived?" Eleanor turned in his arms to face him, her eyes reflecting all the joy and challenge and growth of their years together. "Beyond anything I could have imagined. Every day with you is a gift I never take for granted. Even when I track mud into the house," he teased. "Even then," she laughed, then grew serious. "What happened here was terrible, but I can't regret the path that led me to you, to our children, to this life we've built." "Nor can I," Weston said softly, bending to kiss her with all the tenderness of their first embrace and all the depth of love that had grown between them since. They rode home as the sun began its descent, returning to the ranch that had become the center of their world. William and Sarah ran to meet them, full of stories about their day with Mrs. Henderson, who had taught them to make her famous apple pie. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, their children safely tucked in bed, Weston took Eleanor's hand in his. "Happy?" he asked simply. "Completely," she answered, resting her head against his shoulder. And in that moment, as in countless moments before and countless yet to come, they knew that what had begun in violence and near tragedy had transformed into something precious, beyond measure, a love that had not only saved them both, but had created a legacy of strength and tenderness that would endure long after them. 10 years later, the Diamond Cross had grown into one of the most successful ranches in Wyoming territory. Under Weston and Eleanor's careful management, they had expanded their operations to include not only cattle, but also horses bred specifically for ranch work, gaining a reputation for producing animals of exceptional quality and temperament. William, now 11, showed every sign of inheriting his father's natural way with horses, while 9-year-old Sarah displayed her mother's head for figures and organization. They had been joined by another brother, Robert, who at 6 was still more interested in adventures than responsibilities. Eleanor had used her growing influence in the community to establish Medicine Bow's first proper school, serving on the board that hired qualified teachers from back east. Her own children attended, riding in each morning with Weston or one of the ranch hands and returning home in the afternoon. The memory of the robbery that had nearly taken her life had faded to an occasional shadow, though the scar at her temple remained as a faint reminder. Jedediah Tanner had died in prison 3 years into his sentence, while Thomas Jenkins had been paroled after serving 12 years, reportedly moving to California to start a new life far from his criminal past. One crisp autumn morning, as Eleanor stood on the porch watching Weston work with a young colt in the corral, a rider appeared on the horizon. As he drew closer, she recognized the familiar figure of Sheriff Miller, now showing his age but still serving Medicine Bow with dedication. "Mrs. Xavier," he greeted her, dismounting stiffly. "Is your husband about?" "In the corral," she replied, concern prickling at his serious expression. "Is something wrong, Sheriff? Got some news that concerns you both. Mind if I wait till he joins us?" Eleanor called to Weston, who turned the Colt over to one of the hands before joining them on the porch. The sheriff declined Eleanor's offer of coffee, seeming eager to deliver his news. "Got a telegram from the marshal in Denver yesterday," he began without preamble. "Thomas Jenkins was found dead in his room at a boarding house there, shot through the heart." Eleanor felt Weston tense beside her. "Why tell us this?" he asked. "Jenkins paid his debt to society and we've put that business behind us." The sheriff reached into his vest pocket, producing a folded piece of paper. "He left this. Asked his landlady to mail it to you, Mrs. Xavier. The local authorities intercepted it and forwarded it through official channels." Eleanor accepted the paper with reluctant fingers. "A letter to me. After all these years. Appears to be a confession of sorts," the sheriff explained. "The marshal thought you should have it given the circumstances." After the sheriff departed, declining once again Eleanor's offer of hospitality, she sat with the unopened letter in her hands, uncertain whether she wanted to know its contents. "You don't have to read it," Weston said gently. "Whatever Jenkins had to say, he's gone now. It can't change anything." "But perhaps it can end something," Eleanor replied thoughtfully. "Close a chapter that's remained slightly open all these years." With steady hands, she unfolded the paper and read aloud. "Mrs. Xavier, or Miss Langley as I knew you, by the time you read this, I will have departed this life. The consumption that began in prison has reached its conclusion, and I face my Maker with the burden of many sins, not least of which was the harm done to you that day in Medicine Bow. I write not to seek forgiveness, which I have no right to expect, but to offer what small peace may come from knowing the full truth. It was not Tanner, but I who fired the shot that struck you. The nervousness you perhaps noticed was real. It was my first robbery, and when you moved suddenly, my finger slipped on the trigger. The remorse I felt watching you fall has haunted me every day since. When Tanner insisted we dispose of you rather than seek help, I committed the greater sin of complying, though I argued against it. I have lived with the knowledge that I left an innocent woman to die, and no prison sentence could punish me more thoroughly than my own conscience has done. Learning of your survival and subsequent happiness has been both a relief and a deeper indictment of my actions. The life I stole from you was restored by better hands than mine, and for that mercy to you, I am genuinely grateful. I go now to whatever judgment awaits me, but could not depart without acknowledging my responsibility and expressing, however inadequately, my profound regret for the suffering I caused. May you and your family continue to prosper in the life you have built from the ashes of my terrible mistake. With sincere remorse, Thomas Jenkins. Eleanor folded the letter carefully when she had finished reading, her expression thoughtful rather than distressed. "Does it trouble you?" Weston asked after a moment of silence. "Strangely, no." She looked up at him, her eyes clear. "It feels completing somehow, to know the full story, to understand that even in that dark moment there was human regret and recognition of wrong." Weston drew her close. "You have a generous spirit, Eleanor Xavier." "Not generous," she corrected gently. "Just at peace. What happened that day led me to you, to our children, to this life that I cherish. I realized long ago that holding on to anger would only diminish the joy I've found since." Together, they decided to burn the letter, watching as the flames consumed Jenkins's final confession. As the paper curled and blackened, Eleanor felt the last lingering shadow of that long-ago violence dissolve into the clear Wyoming air. Life at the Diamond Cross continued its steady rhythm through the changing seasons. Eleanor expanded her involvement in community affairs, helping to establish a small library adjacent to the school and organizing regular cultural events that brought a touch of refinement to the frontier town. Weston, recognized for his fair dealing and sound judgment, was appointed to the Territorial Livestock Commission, a position that required occasional travel but brought valuable connections and information back to their operation. Their children grew and flourished. William, at 16, had developed into a thoughtful young man with his father's quiet strength and his mother's analytical mind. He worked alongside Weston during school breaks, absorbing every aspect of ranch management while nurturing dreams of attending the agricultural college back east. Sarah, at 14, combined beauty and brains in a way that both delighted and concerned her parents. Already turning heads in Medicine Bow, she nonetheless remained focused on her education, declaring her intention to become a teacher, or perhaps even a lawyer, ambitions that would have seemed impossible for a woman when Eleanor first arrived in Wyoming. 11-year-old Robert, the most free-spirited of their children, filled their home with laughter and occasional chaos. His natural charm and curiosity led him into frequent adventures and scrapes, but his heart was unfailingly kind, especially toward animals and those weaker than himself. And then there was James, their unexpected blessing, born when Eleanor was 40, a time when she and Weston had thought their family complete. Now 3, little James brought renewed joy and energy to parents who might otherwise have begun to ease into a more sedate middle age. On the 20th anniversary of the day Weston had found Eleanor, they hosted a celebration at the Diamond Cross, not of the robbery that had nearly ended her life, but of the rescue that had begun their shared journey. Friends and family gathered to mark the occasion, many traveling considerable distances to attend. To Weston and Eleanor, Mr. Henderson proposed, raising his glass as the assembled guests fell silent. Though retired from active management of the ranch, the old man remained a beloved figure to all who knew him. 20 years ago, a tragedy became a miracle through the courage and compassion of 2 extraordinary people. The Diamond Cross and all of us are better for having witnessed your journey. Cheers and the clinking of glasses followed his toast. Eleanor, seated beside Weston at the long table set up in the ranch yard, squeezed her husband's hand beneath the tablecloth. Later, as twilight softened the landscape and lanterns cast a golden glow over the gathering, Weston led Eleanor away from the celebration to a quiet spot behind the barn. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small box from his pocket. Inside lay a locket of delicate silver filigree, more elaborate than the simple one she had worn when he found her. "Open it," he urged softly. Within were 2 miniature portraits, one of Weston as he looked now, his face weathered by sun and time but his eyes still bright with the same steady devotion she had come to rely on. The other, a perfect likeness of Eleanor herself, capturing both her outward beauty and something of her inner strength. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the images with gentle fingers. "Turn it over." Engraved on the back were the words, "Found you once, choose you every day." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as Weston fastened the locket around her neck. 20 years, and you still find ways to surprise me." "I plan to continue for at least 20 more, he promised, drawing her into his arms. They swayed together in the gathering darkness, no music necessary beyond the rhythm of their shared heartbeats. Around them, the sounds of laughter and conversation from their friends and family created a cocoon of belonging that neither could have imagined on that distant day when fate had brought them together on the Wyoming plains. "Do you ever wonder," Eleanor asked softly, "what might have happened if you had taken a different route that day? If you hadn't seen me?" "No," Weston replied without hesitation. "Some things are meant to be, Eleanor. I believe I would have found you somehow, somewhere." Our souls were destined to meet." She smiled against his shoulder, hearing in his words the echo of her own conviction. From violence had come healing, from loss had come abundance, from a moment that should have ended everything had come a lifetime of everything that mattered. "I love you, Weston Xavier," she said simply, "today and always." "And I love you, Eleanor Xavier," he responded, the familiar words holding the weight and wonder of their journey together. "Today and always." As the stars emerged in the vast Wyoming sky, they returned to the celebration hand in hand, moving from table to share moments with those who had become part of their extended family over the years. Eleanor watched Weston lift little James onto his shoulders, saw William deep in conversation with the new foreman, observed Sarah helping Mrs. Henderson distribute slices of her famous apple pie, and noted Robert regaling younger children with what was undoubtedly an exaggerated tale of adventure. This was the legacy of that fateful day, not just their love, precious as it was, but this web of connections, this community they had helped to build and strengthen. From one act of violence had blossomed countless acts of kindness and creation. From one moment when life had hung by a thread, had come a tapestry of lives intertwined and enriched by their shared journey. As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, Eleanor stood on the porch of the home she and Weston had built, her hand resting lightly on the new locket at her throat. The future stretched before them, unknown but unfolding with promise. Whatever it held, they would face it as they had faced every challenge and opportunity of the past 20 years together, stronger for having found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. Grateful for each day of the life, they continued to build on foundations of courage, forgiveness, and abiding love.